Good morning. Let's take a few minutes or just a moment to tune in, breathing into the heart space and into the belly. And exhale, releasing. Thank you, Earth. Thank you, Spirit. Thank you, trees and birds, for being here with me today. So this video is part of a project that I started for myself called the All of Me Project, where I'm just sharing all the parts of me and whatever else wants to come through. And today I'm talking about blood, menstrual blood, period blood, moon blood, the mother blood, life blood. It's really important to talk about this because, well, we all come from it. We all gestate in a womb before we're born. And in our culture, the blood is not honored. The blood is considered disgusting and something to be ashamed of and dirty, unclean. And we internalize these messages, no matter if we have a womb or not. But I'm speaking as someone who does have a womb, and it's really an important story to highlight for those of us who do have wombs, who have bled at some point in our life. So I'm going to tell the story of my first blood and then my relationship with bleeding up until now and my cycle. So I bled for the first time when I was turning 16. I was still 15, but I was going to be turning 16 soon, in a few months. And I already had a story around my blood because I went through puberty late, and most of my friends had their periods already, and so I wanted to have mine, and I lied about it to some people. And I remember being in a cinematography class freshman year and just being teased about being on my period when I'd walk into the room without a smile on my face or something by the boys in the class, like, oh, Anna must be on her period. And I hadn't started my cycle yet, but would kind of go along with it. So yeah, just had this idea, like, okay, being on my period, I want to have it to be like the other girls that I know, but also it means that there's some, like, when I'm on my period, that's a time when there's something off about me. And yeah, so when I finally did get it, at first, I didn't realize that I had it. The blood was really dark, and I just kept wiping, and I thought it was poop. And then after a day, I was like, oh, okay, this is my period. And I told my mom, and I remember we were in the garage, and I told her sort of on the opposite side of the garage, and she immediately started crying. And my mom and I didn't have the type of relationship where we could be vulnerable with each other, and where she could take me in her arms and I could be soothed by her. And so that, her tears really like put me into a state of like shock and fear. And so I just sort of told her, and then was like, okay, and went off on my own, did my thing. And I just had it in my mind that I was immediately gonna use a tampon. I was like, okay, all the other girls, they use tampons, I'm gonna use a tampon too. And so I used one, and it was really hard to put in, and I went really slow and finally got it in there. And I was like, okay, this is just how it is. It's hard to put in, but I got it. And then when I went to try to take it out, I couldn't take it out. And I tried really hard, pulled on it, couldn't do it. I got a mirror and looked at it, and I saw that so the tampon, there's the tampon, and then there was a flap, oh, this phone is falling, a flap of skin in between where the tampon is going to come out. So like, if this is my vagina, the tampon's coming out here, there's a flap of skin in the middle, right? And so I did some research and found out that I had a partially imperforate hymen, also known as a septate hymen, although a septate hymen is usually, it's basically like for both of them, you have two entrances to your vagina. A septate hymen usually goes up farther, and a partially imperforate hymen does not go up as far. And it's not the type of hymen that would just that just would break when you have sex or when you exercise hard or something like that. It's a very, very thick piece of skin that doesn't break on its own. And so I remember telling my mom that I couldn't get it out and thought that I had this thing, and she was like, no, like there's no way you do, like I know, like that's not a thing, you don't have it. And she was like, let me see. And I said no, like of course, like we just didn't have that relationship where she could see it. So the determined person that I am, I continued to try to get it out, still couldn't. I ended up asking a friend of mine to take it out at school, and she did. But after that experience, I was like, okay, I have this thing that's wrong with my vagina, and my mom doesn't believe me, so I'm just gonna not wear tampons for now and deal with that later. And the summer came around of that year, and I was going to be a counselor in training at camp, and so I decided I would try a tampon again. So I did, and of course the same thing happened. It was really, really hard to get out, and it hurt, and so I used a fork and pried it out myself. And at that point I was like, okay mom, like let's go ahead and see the gynecologist, because if you don't believe me, I know what's true in my body, and I want to have someone validate this. And so at that point my mom was like, okay, like fine, we'll do it. And so we did end up seeing the gynecologist, and at that point, when we went to see her, she looked at it and she said, oh yeah, this is a partially imperforate hymen. It's not very common, but it's also not entirely uncommon. And so when we got that validation from her, it happened to be the same doctor that delivered me. Again, my mom burst into tears and said, I can't believe that Anna has this. I can't believe she has this thing. My daughter has this thing. And that was also a similarly like traumatic and painful experience, just where seeing her, one, believe the doctor instead of me, who told her that I had this from the very beginning. And also, you know, like her being in pain that I had this thing wrong with me, rather than asking how I felt about it. Yeah, and the similar pattern in my body of tensing up and just feeling like, okay, my mom's crying and I have this thing and I'm gonna just tense up and hold everything in. So I ended up having, I'm just balancing this precariously on a tree, and I ended up having a surgery and had the partially imperfect hymen cut, healed from that, but didn't process anything about it. You know, didn't really think much of it, just kind of like, okay, got this thing, moving on. Anyway, all this was in high school, and then so back to my blood. The blood, the sweet, sweet blood. So I went to Peru and Bolivia right after high school, and when I did, I learned for the first time about a Diva Cup, a menstrual cup, a moon cup. I don't have mine with me, but it's a little silicone cup, and you put it inside of you and you collect your blood in that, and then you can do whatever you like with it. You can put it on your plants, you can drink it if you like, you can put it down the toilet, whatever you like to do with your blood. So when I first learned about that, I was like, what, like a reusable like tampon? That sounds crazy, what is this? And then of course it became part of my reality, and I tried one for the first time, and that was also, it was scary to put in because I wasn't used to touching myself or having a relationship with my vagina. And so when I put it inside of me, it was hard to get out the first time, and but little by little I got used to moving my fingers around in there and feeling for the shape of it, and very smoothly was able to take it in and out. So that became my main way of using I would use that for every time that I bled. And then that following year, when I was in Colorado at school, I was surrounded by a community that was a little more blood positive. Still not super blood positive, but I started using my blood to wash my face because I learned that the blood contains a lot of nutrients, and I would wash my face with it sometimes. I would sometimes mix it with a little water and water my houseplants with it. So I had this idea that the blood, there's something sacred about it, and not disgusting, but sacred and clean and life-giving. But I didn't really feel the full depth of it or start to notice the different cycles and rhythms of my body throughout the month until recently, about a year ago or so. And so yeah, I went on, living with the Diva Cup, and I would also get minor cramps, but nothing too intense. And then I also started using Thinx underwear, which are basically period underwear that you bleed directly into, and you can wear them with a Diva Cup or Tampon, or you can wear them just on their own. And I started to wear them on their own without the Diva Cup, because at times I felt like my body didn't want anything inside of me when I was bleeding, because that downward motion of releasing, sometimes my vagina just wanted to completely bleed freely. Okay, so yeah, a year ago I went to a retreat with this woman, Aya, and it was a serpent retreat, so we were working with snake medicine, dancing with snakes and such, but also just, exploring our sexuality and the medicine of the blood. And what is blood? What is this life-giving force? And so the first night we were all invited to tune into like our relationship with our blood, and I was bleeding during that time that I was there, and so much magic awoke within me from that experience and from witnessing Aya honor her own blood and realizing that blood used to be honored, that there used to be rituals around our blood and around the different cycles that we have as people with wombs, and that like this isn't like some sort of crazy esoteric knowledge. It's actually really rooted in our human experience and in science. Our menstrual blood contains stem cells. It's what makes every part of our body, and of course it contains stem cells because it's what we were like born in. We were in this like menstrual blood soup for 9 months before we were born into the world. It is literally the life-giving force. And so it's ironic that we live in this culture that like is so welcoming and able to talk about having kids, the concept of, oh yeah, let's just have kids, but then so fearful of the menstrual blood which creates the children. And and it's like we forget to honor the cycle each month, because so being at this retreat, not only did I learn about like the physical like nourishment of the lifeblood, that blood, our menstrual blood, is much different than the blood that would come out of us if we cut ourselves. That blood doesn't contain stem cells, but the one that we have in our wombs does. And so yes, not only is the blood extremely nourishing, but also as people who have wombs, we have different stages of our cycles. And so normally I think what we hear about in mainstream media and such is just like the concept of PMS. Like, okay, PMS is a thing, that's it. And actually what I've found in tuning into my own cycle and just sitting with other women who have tuned into theirs, that there's so much more than that. And also it's very physiological in our body what's happening. So I'll just briefly touch upon the 4 archetypes that I am in touch with my cycle, which I could go into detail about, but I'll just touch upon them. So 4 archetypes. If you start counting the days of your cycle with when you bleed as day 1, then it actually begins with the archetype of the crone, the death, the elderly, wise woman who is dying. Because each month we do have this death. We have this release of the womb space that was created to potentially house a growing human that is then released, that is shed. And so all the emotions, all the tears, all the joy, the beauty, the everything, the projects that we've been gestating in our own womb of life, they release with that blood. And so there's a beauty in that. And it's also a time to go inward, to close our eyes, to be in that darkness, to be in that ethereal space, to allow ourselves to release, to slow down, to rest. And we live in a culture that does not allow time for rest. We live in a very linear culture that is fast-paced and that has a lot of judgment and shaming around anything other than that, around the cyclical nature of the womb, really. So that's the first part of the cycle, the death, the crone. And then we move into the maiden archetype, the young, budding woman with life. Just, it's the springtime, it's the joy, it's the, like everything is so fresh and beautiful and it smells so good and we've just awoken and so we move into that phase, the virgin often called as well. And that phase is just coming out of the dream time, the darkness, just experimenting and still not, having like a ton of energy, but you're waking up and, maybe beginning creative projects and just having that sort of like interest and curiosity and zest for life again. And then we move into the phase of the mother, and this is right around ovulation. And ovulation is when our bodies release an egg. The unfertilized egg is released from the system. And after that, we are no longer fertile. We are no longer fertile for that cycle. And that this is also something that I really just learned last year about just the when I'm fertile and what does it mean to be fertile, and how fertility is beautiful and not something that I have to fear. So yeah, the mother, this is the shortest time of the cycle too. Well, that and the crone, but yeah, the mother is when you also have a lot of energy and just sort of that nurturing spirit comes out and saying yes to things and diving in, and you're ovulating, and yeah, so it can be a really juicy time of the cycle. And then we move into the enchantress / wild woman, the one who lives in the forest. This is the phase of my cycle I'm in right now, the luteal phase, when luteinizing hormone is produced. And this phase is particularly mystical because you're the bridge between worlds here. There's a lot of creative potential and there's a lot of wells that we can fall into, and it's just like the wild woman who has no structure, who has the crazy wisdom, who is not gonna say just yes to anything that someone wants her to do. She's gonna go and she's gonna pave her path, and she's gonna be wild, and she's gonna do things that are not conventional. And I'm really feeling her right now. Thank you, enchantress. Thank you, wild woman. That's why I'm out in the forest right now. And our culture really doesn't have space for her because she's up and she's down and she's up and she's down and she's feeling, and she has these big splashes of emotion and then she's down again, and so not only does our culture not have space for her, but we as people who have been raised in this culture don't make the space for her either, because this is, I've found, when we can often feel crazy and have others call us that, because this is also the PMS phase, and it's we can be made to feel crazy during this phase because when we live in a culture that just prioritizes like the linear movement and structure and everything staying the same and not having space for like the wildness that nature is, then we can really judge ourselves harshly, and it's a phase that we often don't want to surrender to or know how to surrender to, because no one's taught us. And so this is like bringing it back to the whole intention with this video. No one's taught us. We are remembering this wisdom on our own and through other people doing this work, and connecting to their ancestors and to the land and to our bodies. And so I'm really passionate about sharing my story in all of its ups and downs, and because I think that, well, we all have a story around our first blood. Anyone who has a womb, people who don't have wombs have a story too around what they began to think and feel as people around them in their life started bleeding. What were they told? Because like no wonder like people who don't have wombs don't know how to handle people who do, like, because they're not taught either about just what this mystery is. And so what I am calling for is just more sharing and listening and exchanging of stories, because this is how we remember, this is how we rebuild, this is how we tune into the cycles again. And I've heard from many mentors of mine that it's long been said that when the womb men start giving their blood back to the earth, then the men will come home from war. And so I like this analogy, because the way I think of it is like, when we start giving our blood to the earth, it means we're tuning in to the cycles and rhythms of nature, and therefore the cycles and rhythms of our bodies. And when we tune into the cycles and rhythms of nature and our bodies, then we are no longer at war with ourselves. And when we're no longer at war with ourselves, there will not be a reflection of those wars out in the world either. And so today, for me, it's starting with sharing this blood story. And thank you. Thank you, Earth, for witnessing. Thank you all for listening. And please, in the comments, share what your story is with your blood. No matter or not, if you bleed or not, share just your story about blood. And I ask for respect in the comments here. This is not a joke. Laughter is beautiful, and I love to laugh, but this is not a joke. The blood is our life force. It's how we all came here. And so I simply ask for respect. Yeah, thank you all, and blessings to everyone. Courage during these times. And keep tuning in to the earth and to our beautiful, beautiful bodies.